the vast chronicles of lightsaber combat, few forms embody the Jedi philosophy as completely as Form 3. While other styles celebrate aggression or elegance, Soresu stands apart as the ultimate expression of patience, discipline, and the profound understanding that true strength often lies not in the ability to strike, but in the wisdom to endure. This is the story of how a combat form born from necessity became the defining defensive technique of an entire order, shaping the fate of countless battles across millennia of galactic history. The lightsaber has always been more than a weapon. From the moment the first Jedi ignited a blade of pure plasma, it became a symbol of the Force itself, a physical manifestation of the eternal struggle between light and darkness. Each swing, each parry, each defensive stance carries with it the weight of thousands of years of accumulated wisdom. The 7 classical forms of lightsaber combat emerged not from abstract theory, but from the harsh realities of conflict, each one a response to specific challenges faced by Force wielders across the ages. Form 1, known as Shicho, arose in those ancient days when lightsabers were still rare and precious artifacts. Its wide, sweeping motions were perfect for establishing dominance in an era when simply possessing such a weapon guaranteed advantage. Form 2, Makashi, followed when lightsaber-to-lightsaber combat became more common, its elegant precision designed for dueling other blade wielders with grace and efficiency. Both forms served their purposes admirably, representing different philosophical approaches to combat, yet both shared a critical weakness that would only become apparent as galactic technology advanced and warfare evolved beyond anyone's expectations. The galaxy was changing. Blaster technology, once crude and unreliable, was becoming sophisticated, mass-produced, and devastatingly effective. Suddenly, Jedi found themselves facing not individual opponents with blades, but squads of soldiers armed with weapons that could fire dozens of bolts per second from considerable distances. A Jedi trained in Shicho or Makashi could handle 1 or 2 shooters, perhaps, but against multiple opponents with ranged weapons, these older forms revealed dangerous limitations. Shicho's sweeping strikes left practitioners exposed to fire from multiple angles. Makashi's tight, dueling-focused movements simply had no answer for the challenge of deflecting rapid blaster fire while maintaining any semblance of offensive capability. The Jedi Order faced a fundamental problem. Their traditional training methods were becoming obsolete in the face of this new reality. Young Jedi venturing into the galaxy found themselves woefully unprepared for combat scenarios that their masters had never had to seriously consider. The old forms assumed a certain battlefield honor, a close quarters engagement where skill with a blade determined the victor. But blasters cared nothing for honor or proximity. They could kill from across a canyon, from behind cover, from positions that made lightsaber techniques irrelevant. Something had to change, and change profoundly, if the Jedi were to remain effective guardians of peace and justice. Form 3 emerged from this crisis not as a sudden revelation, but as a gradual evolution driven by necessity and survival. Jedi who had faced overwhelming blaster fire in the field began developing techniques to better deflect these attacks, modifications to their stances that presented smaller targets, adjustments to their blade movements that prioritized coverage over aggression. These techniques were shared, refined, systematized. What began as battlefield improvisation slowly coalesced into a coherent fighting style, one that fundamentally reimagined what a lightsaber could do and how a Jedi should move. The breakthrough came with the understanding that a lightsaber blade possessed an extraordinary property that had been underutilized. The plasma blade could deflect blaster bolts. More than that, with sufficient skill and practice, it could reflect those bolts back at their source, turning an attacker's own weapon against them. This realization transformed defensive combat entirely. A Jedi skilled in deflection techniques didn't merely survive blaster fire. They could neutralize the threat completely without ever needing to close the distance to their opponents. This was revolutionary, a complete inversion of previous tactical thinking. But deflection alone wasn't enough. The Jedi developing what would become Soresu understood that true defensive mastery required more than just the ability to bat away incoming fire. They needed a comprehensive system that could address every conceivable threat. Lightsabers, vibroblades, blasters, multiple opponents, prolonged engagements, confined spaces, open battlefields. The form that emerged was holistic in its approach, treating combat not as a series of isolated techniques, but as a continuous flow of controlled responses to an ever-changing tactical situation. Central to Soresu's philosophy was the concept of economy of motion. Every movement, every shift of weight, every rotation of the blade had to serve a defensive purpose without wasting energy. This wasn't merely a practical consideration for prolonged battles, though that mattered greatly. It was a philosophical statement about the nature of combat itself. Where forms, I embraced wide, powerful strikes, and Form 4 would later celebrate acrobatic flourishes, Soresu insisted that true mastery lay in doing exactly what was necessary, and nothing more. Extraneous motion was more than inefficient. It was dangerous, creating openings that a skilled opponent could exploit in the fraction of a second it took to complete an unnecessary flourish. The physical demands of Soresu differed markedly from other forms. While forms like Ataru required tremendous athleticism and stamina, Soresu placed its greatest emphasis on mental discipline and situational awareness. A practitioner's stance was compact, their body presenting the smallest possible target. The blade never stopped moving, creating a shield of energy around the wielder. But these movements were tight and controlled, each one calculated to provide maximum coverage with minimum effort. The physical conditioning required was less about raw strength or agility, and more about the precise muscle control needed to maintain this defensive screen for extended periods. This emphasis on control extended to the practitioner's entire being. Soresu demanded a calm, centered mind capable of maintaining focus under the most intense pressure. When surrounded by enemies, when blaster bolts filled the air like rain, when the situation seemed impossible, the Soresu master remained utterly composed. This composure wasn't mere stubbornness or denial of danger. It was a profound trust in the technique, in the training, in the fundamental soundness of the defensive approach. Panic led to mistakes. Mistakes created openings. Openings meant death. Calmness under fire wasn't optional for a Soresu practitioner. It was the foundation upon which every technique was built. The form earned its nickname, the Way of the Mynock, from these principles of defensive patience. Mynocks, small parasitic creatures that attached themselves to starships, were nearly impossible to dislodge once they found purchase. They weren't aggressive predators, but their tenacity and defensive resilience made them formidable in their own way. Similarly, a master of Soresu became almost impossible to defeat through direct assault. They could weather storm after storm of attacks, absorbing the fury of their opponents while conserving their own energy, waiting with infinite patience for the moment when aggression inevitably created inexploitable weakness. This philosophy aligned perfectly with the Jedi Code's emphasis on peace and defense rather than aggression. While the Sith and Dark Jedi gloried in overwhelming power and dominating attacks, Soresu embodied the Jedi ideal of the guardian rather than the warrior. A Jedi practicing Soresu didn't seek to destroy their opponent. They sought to neutralize the threat with minimal harm, to defend rather than attack, to preserve life wherever possible. In this sense, Form 3 became more than just a combat technique. It was a physical expression of Jedi philosophy, a meditation on patience, discipline, and the strength found in restraint. The techniques of Soresu were deceptively simple in concept, but extraordinarily difficult to master. The most fundamental was the defensive stance itself. A Soresu practitioner stood with feet shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent, center of gravity low and stable. The lightsaber was held in a central guard position, blade angled to provide maximum coverage of the body's vital areas. From this stance, the practitioner could shift instantly in any direction, the blade always moving to intercept threats from any angle. The movements were economic, never overextending, never committing fully to any one defensive action until absolutely necessary. Blade work in Soresu focused on tight, controlled movements close to the body. Where Shaicho practitioners might swing their blades in wide arcs, and Makashi duelists extended their blades in elegant thrusts, Soresu users kept their weapon close, creating a defensive sphere that was difficult to penetrate. The blade traced patterns in the air, never still, constantly adjusting position to present the best angle for deflecting incoming attacks. These movements weren't random. They followed precise forms designed to ensure complete coverage while maintaining the energy efficiency necessary for prolonged engagements. The deflection of blaster fire represented the most visible and dramatic aspect of Soresu technique. A practitioner learned to sense incoming bolts through the force, their precognition allowing them to position their blade fractions of a second before the bolt arrived. The angle of deflection was crucial. A poorly angled block might send the bolt careening into an innocent bystander, or simply waste the defensive opportunity. A well-executed deflection sent the bolt harmlessly into the ground, or, with greater skill, back toward the shooter. This latter technique required extraordinary precision, as the margins for error were incredibly small, but it turned defense into offense, without requiring the practitioner to abandon their defensive stance. One of the most sophisticated techniques in the Soresu arsenal was the deflecting slash. This move served dual purposes, embodying the form's philosophy of efficiency. As a practitioner deflected a blaster bolt, they redirected the momentum generated by that deflection into a slashing attack at an adjacent target. This allowed a Soresu user to simultaneously defend against ranged attacks and threaten nearby enemies, all while advancing their position toward their primary target. The technique required perfect timing and spatial awareness, as mistiming the slash could leave the practitioner exposed to follow-up shots. But when executed properly, it showcased Soresu's ability to blend defense and offense seamlessly. Against multiple blaster-wielding opponents, Soresu masters employed the advanced technique known as the circle of shelter. This was more than just skilled deflection. It represented a meditative state where the practitioner opened themselves completely to the force, allowing its guidance to flow through them without conscious thought. In this state, a Soresu master could sense the positions and intentions of dozens of attackers simultaneously, their blade moving in an intricate dance that seemed to anticipate fire before it even happened. Witnesses described it as watching someone dance in the rain without getting wet, as blaster bolts peppered the air around them yet never found their mark. Masters of this technique could hold off 20 or more shooters for extended periods, their defense appearing effortless even as they faced impossible odds. The moving meditation aspect of the circle of shelter was perhaps the most profound expression of Soresu's philosophy. In this state, the boundary between the practitioner and the force dissolved. There was no conscious decision-making, no analysis of threats and responses. The force itself guided the blade, moved the body, determined every defensive motion. This surrender of conscious control to the flow of the force required complete trust and years of practice to achieve. But once mastered, it elevated Soresu beyond mere technique into something approaching art, or perhaps transcendence. Some practitioners reported experiencing brief visions of the future while in this state, their connection to the force so complete that temporal boundaries became fluid. Soresu's approach to lightsaber combat differed significantly from forms specifically designed for dueling. A Soresu practitioner facing another blade wielder adopted a patient, conservative strategy. They didn't seek to overwhelm their opponent with aggressive strikes or clever feints. Instead, they focused on perfect defense, observing their opponent's technique, learning their patterns, waiting for inevitable mistakes. Every combatant, no matter how skilled, had weaknesses in their form, moments where aggression left them exposed or energy efficiency wavered. A Soresu master watched for these moments with the patience of stone, content to deflect and parry indefinitely until the perfect opening presented itself. This waiting game was psychological warfare as much as physical combat. Aggressive opponents, particularly those trained in forms like Ataru or Gem, expected their fury to eventually overwhelm any defense. When faced with a Soresu master whose guard never wavered, whose composure never cracked, frustration naturally built. Frustration led to mistakes, to overcommitment, to the kind of sloppy technique that created exploitable openings. A Soresu practitioner understood that time was their ally. The longer a battle continued, the more their opponent's energy waned, while the Soresu user, fighting with minimal exertion, remained fresh and alert. The mental discipline required for this approach cannot be overstated. Human nature craves action, resolution, the decisive blow that ends conflict. Soresu demanded its practitioners suppress these instincts, embracing instead a philosophy of infinite patience. This was especially challenging for younger Jedi, whose youthful energy and confidence often made the defensive passivity of Soresu feel like cowardice or hesitation. Learning to trust the form, to believe that perfect defense would eventually create victory, represented one of the greatest challenges facing any student of Form 3. Those who mastered this mental aspect found themselves wielding not just a fighting technique, but a profound life philosophy applicable far beyond the battlefield. The training regimen for Soresu was as demanding as any combat form, though its challenges were different from the physical rigors of acrobatic forms or the endless drilling required for Makashi's precision. Students began with the basics: proper stance, correct blade positioning, the fundamental defensive movements that formed the foundation of the style. They practiced against training droids programmed to fire blaster bolts from multiple angles, learning to deflect without thinking, to let the force guide their blade rather than relying on conscious reaction. Hours turned to months, turned to years of repetition, each session building muscle memory and force sensitivity until deflection became as natural as breathing. Advanced training introduced complications that tested a practitioner's adaptability. Multiple opponents attacking from different directions, confined spaces that limited movement options, uneven terrain that challenged balance and footing, prolonged engagements that tested both physical stamina and mental focus. Masters sometimes subjected their students to scenarios that seemed impossible, overwhelming odds designed to push them beyond their limits, teaching them that Soresu's defensive capabilities extended far beyond what seemed reasonable or achievable. These extreme training sessions weren't cruelty. They were preparation for the harsh reality that a Jedi might one day face situations where only perfect technique and unwavering trust in the Force could ensure survival. As Soresu evolved and matured as a combat form, it began influencing the development of subsequent forms. Form 5, both the Cheyenne and Gem. Variations emerged partly as responses to Soresu's perceived weaknesses. While Soresu excelled at defense and survival, critics argued it lacked the offensive punch needed to decisively end conflicts. Form 5 attempted to address this by incorporating Soresu's defensive techniques while adding more aggressive counterattacking capabilities. Similarly, Form 6, Neiman, drew heavily on Soresu's principles of balance and efficiency, seeking to create a more versatile hybrid style. In this way, Form 3's influence extended far beyond those who specialized in it exclusively, its techniques and philosophy permeating the broader understanding of lightsaber combat. The philosophical implications of Soresu extended into Jedi training more broadly. Masters teaching other subjects often use Soresu as a metaphor for dealing with challenges in life. Just as a Soresu practitioner weathered attacks with patience and composure, so too should a Jedi face adversity without panic or desperation. Just as Form 3 emphasized efficiency and conservation of energy, so too should a Jedi approach problems with mindfulness and intentionality rather than wasteful excess. The form became emblematic of the Jedi way itself, a physical practice that reinforced the Order's most cherished principles. Yet for all its strengths, Soresu was never without its critics and limitations. The very patience that made it so effective could become a weakness against certain opponents or in certain situations. Time-sensitive scenarios where delay meant catastrophe didn't favor Soresu's wait-and-see approach. Opponents who could maintain aggressive controlled pressure indefinitely might wear down even a skilled Soresu practitioner's defenses through sheer persistence. The form's emphasis on defense over offense meant that victories often took longer to achieve, and in large-scale battles where multiple fronts needed attention, this could create tactical problems. Some Jedi found Soresu's defensive philosophy personally incompatible with their temperament or beliefs. Young, energetic Jedi often chafed at the form's passivity, preferring styles that allowed them to take the initiative and actively shape the course of battle. Even among those who appreciated Soresu's effectiveness, many chose to study it as a supplementary skill rather than their primary form, incorporating its defensive techniques into a more balanced combat approach. This was perfectly acceptable within Jedi training philosophy. The forms existed to serve the Jedi, not the other way around, and combining techniques from multiple forms to create a personalized style was encouraged. Despite these debates and limitations, Form 3 carved out an essential place in the Jedi Order's combat curriculum. Every Jedi, regardless of their primary form preference, learned at least the basics of Soresu. The ability to deflect blaster fire was simply too crucial for field operations to ignore, and Form 3 offered the most comprehensive training in this vital skill. Many Jedi who specialized in other forms for lightsaber dueling would switch to Soresu principles when facing ranged attackers, recognizing that different tactical situations called for different approaches. This flexibility, this understanding that no single form held all the answers, represented the mature sophistication of Jedi combat philosophy. The true test of any combat form is not how it looks in controlled training scenarios, but how it performs under the most desperate real-world conditions. Soresu would prove its worth countless times throughout galactic history, in battles both famous and forgotten. But its story is best told through those who mastered it completely, who took these principles and techniques and elevated them to an art form that transcended mere combat. The masters of Form 3 would demonstrate that perfect defense, when wielded with wisdom and skill, could become the most potent weapon imaginable. As we delve deeper into the legacy of Form 3, we turn our attention to those legendary figures who embodied Soresu's principles, who made the form their own, and in doing so, shaped the course of galactic history. From Jedi temples to battlefields across countless worlds, from personal duels to massive conflicts, these masters would prove that the way of the Minok was far more than just another fighting style. It was a philosophy of combat, of life, of what it meant to be a guardian rather than a warrior. Their stories would inspire generations of Jedi and demonstrate that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in the power to destroy, but in the wisdom to endure. The history of Form 3 is inseparable from the extraordinary individuals who mastered its techniques and philosophy. While countless Jedi learned Soresu's basic principles throughout the millennia. Only a select few truly embodied the form, pushing its capabilities to heights that seemed impossible to those who merely dabbled in its techniques. These masters came from different eras, different backgrounds, and sometimes even from different sides of the eternal conflict between light and dark. Yet they shared a common understanding that perfect defense, when mastered completely, transcended its apparent limitations and became a force capable of shaping destinies. Among all who have ever practiced Form 3, one name stands above all others. Obi-Wan Kenobi's mastery of Soresu was so complete, so refined, that even Mace Windu, himself one of the greatest duelists in Jedi history, acknowledged Kenobi not merely as a master of the form, but as the master. This wasn't hyperbole or simple respect between colleagues. Windu's assessment came from his intimate understanding of lightsaber combat and his observations of Kenobi's technique over many years of the Clone Wars. When the creator of Viapad, a form considered by many to be the pinnacle of aggressive lightsaber technique, declared someone the definitive master of defensive combat, the weight of that statement was immeasurable. Kenobi's path to this mastery began with tragedy and hard-won wisdom. As a young Padawan, he had trained under Qui-Gon Jinn in Form 4, Ataru. The acrobatic, aggressive style suited young Obi-Wan's energy and athleticism. He was skilled with it, comfortable in its flowing movements and devastating attacks. When he and his master confronted the Sith Lord Darth Maul on Naboo, Kenobi fought with the fierce determination of an Ataru practitioner, his blade work showing promise of the great warrior he would become. But that battle ended in horror that would reshape his entire approach to combat. Qui-Gon Jinn fell to Maul's blade. The legendary Jedi Master, for all his skill and wisdom, was defeated in part because Ataru's aggressive nature left him vulnerable. The form's acrobatic attacks required space and stamina. In the confined corridor where the final confrontation took place, these requirements became fatal weaknesses. Qui-Gon's stamina, no longer that of a young man, couldn't sustain the high energy demands of prolonged Ataru combat. A moment of fatigue, a split second, where his defense wasn't perfect, and Maul's blade found its mark. Young Obi-Wan, separated from the fight by a laser gate, could only watch as his master fell. This moment crystallized in Kenobi's mind. In the years that followed, as he took on Anakin Skywalker as his Padawan and rose through the ranks of the Jedi Order, Obi-Wan subjected his own combat training to ruthless self-examination. Ataru had failed his master when defense mattered most. Form Fee's emphasis on overwhelming offense meant that when fatigue set in, or when circumstances limited mobility, a practitioner became vulnerable. Kenobi decided that if he was to fulfill his responsibilities as a Jedi Knight, and eventually a master, he needed a fighting style that wouldn't abandon him when conditions turned against him. He needed a form that would work as well in tight corridors as on open battlefields, that would remain effective when he was tired, that prioritized survival above all else. Soresu offered everything Kenobi sought. Its efficiency meant that stamina wasn't the defining factor in a practitioner's effectiveness. Its tight, controlled movements worked in any environment. Most importantly, its defensive philosophy aligned with the lesson Qui-Gon's death had taught him. Surviving the battle was more important than winning it decisively. Kenobi threw himself into mastering Form 3 with a dedication that bordered on obsession. He studied with every available teacher, practiced against training remotes for hours each day, meditated on the philosophical aspects of the form until its principles became inseparable from his understanding of what it meant to be a Jedi. The transformation was profound and total. Where young Obi-Wan had been an aggressive, energetic fighter, Master Kenobi became patience personified. His stance in combat was relaxed, yet alert. His movements economical, yet fluid. He never wasted motion, never overcommitted to an attack, never allowed emotion to compromise his technique. Observers noted that watching Kenobi fight was like watching water flow around obstacles. Nothing could disrupt his composure. Every attack was absorbed and redirected. Every aggressive push met with yielding defense that somehow always positioned him advantageously when the moment for counterattack finally arrived. The Clone Wars provided countless opportunities for Kenobi to demonstrate his mastery. During the chaos of the Battle of Geonosis, where the Jedi Strike Team faced overwhelming droid armies, Kenobi's tight defense and energy-efficient movements allowed him to survive where many of his comrades fell. Blaster fire filled the arena from every direction, but his blades seemed to be everywhere at once, deflecting bolts with minimal effort, protecting not just himself but nearby allies when possible. His survival wasn't luck or superior force power. It was pure technique, the perfection of Form 3's principles under the most extreme battlefield conditions imaginable. His confrontations with Count Dooku revealed both the strengths and limits of Soresu against certain opponents. Dooku was a master of Form 2, Makashi, a style specifically designed for lightsaber-to-lightsaber combat, with emphasis on precision and economy of motion. In their first duel during the Battle of Geonosis, Kenobi found himself overmatched. Dooku's mastery was so complete that many of Kenobi's cutting parries missed their mark entirely, forcing the Jedi into scrambling defensive positions that rapidly exhausted him. Yet even in defeat, Kenobi's Soresu served its primary purpose. He survived. His defense, while penetrated, held long enough for help to arrive, demonstrating that even when facing a superior opponent in an unfavorable matchup, Soresu could buy the time necessary for circumstances to change. By their later encounters, Kenobi had refined his technique to the point where Dooku's advantage diminished significantly. Though Dooku remained the more skilled duelist in pure technical terms, Kenobi's improved mastery meant the Count could no longer simply overwhelm him. Their duels became prolonged affairs, where Dooku's attempts to break through Kenobi's defense grew increasingly desperate. On several occasions, only outside intervention prevented these battles from reaching their natural conclusions. Dooku himself came to respect, and even fear, Kenobi's defensive capabilities, recognizing that his favorite student had become something genuinely dangerous through sheer perfection of a single form. The duel with General Grievous on Utapau showcased Soresu against multiple simultaneous attacks in the most dramatic way imaginable. Grievous, the cyborg general trained by Dooku himself, attacked with 4 lightsabers at once, creating a whirlwind of blades that seemed impossible to defend against. The sheer number of attacks per second would have overwhelmed any form that relied on specific parries or blocks for each strike. But Soresu's approach of creating a defensive sphere through constant blade motion proved perfectly suited to this challenge. Kenobi's single blade moved so precisely, covering so much space with such efficiency, that Grievous's four-armed assault found no openings. More than just surviving the onslaught, Kenobi adapted his defensive angles mid-combat to turn Grievous's aggression against him. By subtly altering how he deflected certain strikes, Kenobi caused Grievous's multiple blades to interfere with each other, creating moments where the general's own weapons disrupted his offensive rhythm. Then, with the patience characteristic of a Soresu master, Kenobi waited for the perfect moment. As Grievous ramped up his intensity and frustration, small openings appeared in his defense. Kenobi clipped off 2 of the mechanical hands, reducing the threat significantly before eventually finishing the confrontation. It was a textbook demonstration of Soresu's core philosophy: weather the storm, wait for mistakes, capitalize with minimal but decisive action. But perhaps the most significant test of Kenobi's mastery came in his duel with Anakin Skywalker on Mustafar. This wasn't just a battle of lightsabers. It was a confrontation between 2 philosophies of combat and life itself. Anakin, newly fallen to the dark side and assuming the identity of Darth Vader, fought with the overwhelming power of Form V, the Gem So. His attacks came with terrifying speed and force, each strike backed by rage and pain channeled through the dark side. He was younger, stronger, faster than his former master. By almost any metric, Vader should have won this duel decisively. Yet Kenobi's Soresu proved equal to the challenge. For an extended battle across the hellish landscape of Mustafar, Kenobi's defense held perfectly against Vader's furious assault. He didn't try to match his former apprentice's power or speed. He didn't need to. Soresu's efficiency meant he wasn't exhausting himself with powerful attacks or desperate scrambling. Meanwhile, Vader's aggressive style, for all its fearsome power, required tremendous energy expenditure. Each massive strike that Kenobi deflected cost Vader more than it cost the defender. Slowly, incrementally, the energy differential accumulated. More importantly, Kenobi manipulated the battlefield itself. Recognizing that a purely defensive approach might not be enough against an opponent as powerful as Vader, Kenobi strategically maneuvered the duel to terrain that favored his defensive style. He guided Vader onto thin metal platforms over lava, narrow catwalks that limited the full expression of Gemso's sweeping power strikes. Finally, he claimed the high ground, a seemingly minor positional advantage that became decisive. When Vader's arrogance led him to attempt a spectacular acrobatic leap directly into Kenobi's optimal defensive zone, the Soresu master capitalized instantly, dismembering his former student with a single perfectly timed strike. It was the ultimate vindication of patience over passion, defense over aggression, wisdom over raw power. This duel became legendary, not just for its personal drama, but for what it revealed about the true potential of Form the Three, against one of the most powerful Force users of the age, against someone he had trained personally and thus knew all his techniques. Against a warrior consumed by rage and dark side power, Kenobi's mastery of Soresu allowed him to emerge victorious. Mace Windu's declaration that Kenobi was the master of Soresu had been proven beyond question. Even decades later, living in exile on Tatooine, Kenobi retained his deep connection to the form, his muscle memory of its movements remaining sharp, even as he set aside his blade for years at a time. Yet Kenobi's story also revealed Soresu's vulnerabilities, particularly in his later years. During his confrontation with Darth Vader on the planet Mapuzo, Kenobi found himself defeated and humiliated. But this loss wasn't a failure of the form itself. It was a failure of the practitioner's connection to the Force. Kenobi had spent years in hiding, his lightsaber buried in desert sand, his connection to the Force weakened by guilt and isolation. Soresu's defensive capabilities rely heavily on the practitioner's ability to sense attacks before they come, to maintain the moving meditation that guides defensive responses. Without a strong connection to the Force, a Soresu master becomes merely an ordinary fighter with good defensive technique. Vader exploited this weakness ruthlessly, flooding the Force with fear and darkness to further disrupt Kenobi's precognitive abilities, ensuring that his former master's vaunted defense couldn't function as it should. Yet even this defeat contained a lesson about Soresu's nature. The form's emphasis on survival meant that even in defeat, Kenobi lived to fight another day. His defensive instincts, ingrained through decades of practice, allowed him to escape with his life despite Vader's overwhelming advantages. By the time of their final confrontation, Kenobi had reconnected with the Force, his mastery of Soresu restored. That final duel on the Death Star showed a Kenobi at peace, defending not to win but to fulfill a larger purpose, demonstrating that Soresu's ultimate expression transcended mere combat victory. While Kenobi's mastery of Soresu became legendary among the Jedi, the form found an unexpected practitioner among the Sith. Darth Xana's use of Form 3 represents one of the most fascinating aspects of Soresu's history, challenging assumptions about the form's inherent compatibility with Jedi philosophy. Xana proved that defensive patience could serve darkness as effectively as light, that Soresu's techniques transcended the simple dichotomy of good and evil to become tools usable by anyone with the discipline to master them. Xana came to Soresu through her master, Darth Bane, who recognized that her physical attributes didn't favor the aggressive power-based styles typical of Sith combat. Where Bane himself was large and powerful, suited for forms that emphasized overwhelming force, Xana was smaller and less physically imposing, but what she lacked in raw physical power, she more than compensated for with patience, tactical thinking, and an extraordinary aptitude for Sith sorcery. Bane understood that Xana needed a fighting style that would allow her to survive long enough to bring her considerable mental powers to bear, a form that would neutralize opponents who sought to overpower her through brute strength. Form 3 provided exactly what Xana needed. She took to its defensive philosophy with surprising ease, her approach to combat already naturally defensive and patient, rather than aggressively forceful. Under Bane's instruction, she became an expert in Soresu's movements and sequences, practicing until the defensive rhythms became instinctive. This instinctive mastery was crucial because Xana's true power lay in her Sith sorcery, particularly her ability to cast illusions and drive opponents mad with visions of their worst fears. She needed a fighting style that would protect her while she wove her dark magic, that would function automatically without requiring her full conscious attention. Xana wielded a double-bladed lightsaber, her weapon of choice presenting unique advantages and challenges for Soresu technique. The double blade offered enhanced coverage, each end of the weapon able to defend different angles simultaneously, amplifying Soresu's already formidable defensive capabilities. But it also required exceptional coordination and spatial awareness, as the weapon's second blade could become a liability in the wrong hands, striking one's own body or creating openings rather than eliminating them. Xana's mastery was so complete that the double blade seemed natural in her hands, spinning and flowing through defensive patterns that appeared choreographed, yet responded perfectly to whatever threats emerged. Her duel with Darth Bane himself, the culmination of her apprenticeship under the rule of two, demonstrated how deadly Soresu could become in the hands of a patient, intelligent practitioner. Bane attacked with his preferred Form 5, Gem So, bringing all his considerable power and dark side fury to bear. His strikes came like thunder, each one capable of shattering lesser defenses. Against almost any other opponent, this aggressive assault would have ended the fight quickly. But Xana's Soresu held firm. Her double blade moved in precise, efficient patterns, deflecting Bane's powerful strikes with minimal effort, never giving him the decisive opening he sought. As the battle continued, Xana's strategy revealed itself. She wasn't trying to defeat Bane through superior swordsmanship. She knew his physical advantages made that impossible. Instead, she used her perfect defense to create the time and mental space necessary to employ her true weapons. While her hands guided her lightsaber through defensive sequences that had become pure instinct, her mind wove illusions into the Force, attacking Bane's psyche with nightmarish visions. Bane found himself fighting on two fronts. Against a physical defense he couldn't penetrate, and against mental assault he couldn't completely block, while maintaining his offensive. The battle became a war of attrition, testing both combatants' endurance and will. Bane's aggressive style required enormous energy expenditure, and his body, already weakened by injuries and the effects of his deteriorating Orbalisk armor, began to falter. Xana, fighting with Soresu's characteristic efficiency, maintained her stamina far better. Her defense never wavered even as she split her focus between physical combat and mental assault. Eventually, Bane's exhaustion and the cumulative effects of Xana's sorcery created the opening she needed. She struck decisively, proving that Soresu's patient approach could triumph even against opponents of legendary power when combined with tactical intelligence and unconventional attacks. Xana's use of Soresu revealed an aspect of the form that Jedi practitioners might have overlooked or deliberately ignored. Soresu wasn't inherently peaceful, or compassionate in its application. The patient, defensive approach could serve any philosophy, any goal. In Xana's hands, it became a tool for dark side domination, protecting her while she inflicted psychological torture on her enemies. This didn't diminish the form's effectiveness. If anything, it proved Soresu's fundamental soundness as a combat technique, independent of moral considerations. Moving through the ages, we find another remarkable master of Form 3 in Luminara Unduli, a Mirialan Jedi master whose skill with Soresu earned her recognition as one of the most formidable defensive duelists of the Clone Wars era. Luminara's approach to the form embodied its philosophical aspects, even more than its purely technical dimensions. She was known throughout the Order for her exceptional discipline and emotional control, qualities that aligned perfectly with Soresu's demands for calm under pressure and patience in the face of aggression. Luminara's mastery manifested not just in her personal combat effectiveness, but in her ability to teach Soresu's principles to her Padawan, Barriss Offee. The relationship between these two Mirialans represented one of the most successful master-student pairings in recent Jedi history. Their shared cultural background and natural compatibility, creating an environment where Soresu techniques could be transmitted with exceptional clarity. Luminara emphasized the mental and philosophical aspects of the form as much as the physical techniques, ensuring that Barriss understood not just how to move, but why each movement mattered, how each defensive choice reflected larger principles about the Force and the Jedi way. Together, Luminara and Barriss demonstrated one of Soresu's most powerful applications, tandem combat. Because Form 3 emphasized positioning, awareness, and defensive coverage rather than aggressive individual action, it lent itself remarkably well to coordinated fighting between multiple practitioners. Luminara and Barriss could position themselves to cover each other's blind spots, their defensive spheres overlapping to create a nearly impenetrable barrier. They sensed threats through the Force in harmony, their responses coordinated without need for verbal communication, each one's defense supporting and enhancing the others. Their deployment during the Second Battle of Geonosis showcased this synergy perfectly. When separated from the main force and forced to navigate the dangerous catacombs beneath the droid foundries, the two faced overwhelming numbers of battle droids and deadly super tanks. Their Soresu training proved invaluable in this environment. The confined passages negated many advantages aggressive forms might have offered, while perfectly suiting Soresu's tight, controlled movements. Blaster fire from multiple angles, limited maneuvering room, the need to protect each other while advancing. All these challenges played directly into Soresu's strengths. Luminara's defense held even when facing extraordinary threats like Asajj Ventress, the dark side assassin whose ferocity and skill intimidated many Jedi. In one notable encounter, Luminara fought Ventress while partially blinded, one eye injured but her Soresu technique remaining sound. She relied on the Force to guide her blade, demonstrating that true mastery of form to thrid transcended physical limitations. The defensive patterns were so ingrained, the connection to the Force so complete, that even significant impairment couldn't compromise her effectiveness. Ventress's aggressive attacks found no openings in Luminara's defense, despite the apparent disadvantage, a testament to how deeply Soresu's principles could be integrated into a practitioner's very being. Barriss Offee's own journey with Soresu eventually took a tragic turn, but her technical mastery of the form remained impressive. She internalized Luminara's teachings thoroughly, developing her own interpretation of Soresu that emphasized repositioning and mobility slightly more than pure static defense. This adaptation made sense given her youth and athleticism. She could afford to be more dynamic in her defensive movements while maintaining Form 3's core principles. Her lightsaber style was described as slippery, difficult to pin down or predict, constantly flowing to new positions that reset the tactical situation. Even after Barriss fell to the dark side, her Soresu training remained evident in her combat. When she fought Anakin Skywalker using stolen red lightsabers, her defense initially frustrated even that powerful warrior's attempts to break through. The mental discipline required for Soresu, once developed, didn't simply disappear even when other aspects of a Jedi's training were abandoned. The form's techniques operated at a level deeper than conscious choice, becoming reflexive responses that persisted regardless of the practitioner's current philosophical alignment. The lineage of Soresu continued through other notable practitioners, each adding their own understanding to the form's legacy. Depa Billaba, a member of the Jedi High Council and student of Mace Windu, taught Form 3 to her Padawan Caleb Dume, who would later be known as Kanan Jarrus. Bilaba's emphasis on Soresu in close-quarter combat situations proved prophetic, as these were precisely the circumstances where Caleb would need the form most desperately during his survival after Order 66. When Order 66 struck and Bilaba sacrificed herself to ensure young Caleb's escape, the defensive training she had instilled in him proved critical to his survival. As Kanan Jarrus, operating as part of the Ghost Crew during the rebellion, he continued to rely on Soresu principles in countless battles against the Empire. His proficiency in Form 3 allowed him to hold his own, even against opponents like the Grand Inquisitor, who recognized Bilaba's distinctive Soresu instruction in Jarrus's technique and knew how to counter it. Yet even countered, Soresu provided enough defensive capability for Jarrus to survive, until circumstances shifted in his favor. Remarkably, Kanan's mastery of Soresu persisted even after being blinded by Darth Maul. The loss of physical sight might have ended the combat effectiveness of practitioners of other forms, but Soresu's emphasis on sensing attacks through the Force, rather than reacting to what the eyes saw, meant that blindness, while certainly a challenge, didn't invalidate the technique. Kanan learned to fight by feeling through the Force exclusively, his Soresu-trained defensive responses functioning even without visual input. In some ways, the blindness even enhanced his connection to the form's philosophical core, forcing absolute trust in the Force's guidance rather than conscious analysis of threats. These masters, Kenobi, Zana, Luminara, Barriss, Bilaba, Jarrus, and countless others across millennia, proved that Soresu was far more than just another combat form. In their hands, it became an expression of their deepest values and beliefs, whether those aligned with the light or embraced the darkness. They demonstrated that perfect defense, when achieved, transcended its apparent limitations to become a force capable of shaping destinies, ending conflicts, and ensuring survival against impossible odds. Their legacy would inspire generations, proving that sometimes the greatest power lies not in the ability to attack, but in the wisdom to endure. The mastery of individual practitioners tells only part of Soresu's story. The form's true significance lies in how it shaped Jedi training, influenced galactic conflicts, and embodied principles that transcended combat itself. To understand Form 30 completely, we must examine not just its greatest masters, but also the broader impact it had on the institutions that taught it, the battles where it proved decisive, and the philosophical legacy it created that endures long after its practitioners have passed into history. At the heart of Soresu instruction within the Jedi Order stood figures like Chin Dralig, whose role as battlemaster of the Jedi Temple placed him at the center of combat training for generations of Jedi. Dralig's position wasn't merely administrative or ceremonial. As battlemaster, he was responsible for maintaining the standards of lightsaber instruction across the entire order, for ensuring that every Jedi had at least basic competency in all forms, and for identifying promising students who might excel in particular styles. His own mastery encompassed all 7 classical forms, but Soresu held special importance in his curriculum for reasons both practical and philosophical. Dralig understood that not every Jedi would become a great duelist, Physical limitations, temperamental incompatibilities, or simple lack of interest in combat meant that many Jedi would never excel at aggressive forms like Ataru or technical forms like Makashi. But Soresu, with its emphasis on defense and survival over dominance, was something every Jedi could benefit from learning well. It didn't require exceptional athleticism or years of dedicated practice to reach basic competency. More importantly, it aligned with the Jedi's role as peacekeepers rather than warriors. A Jedi who mastered defensive techniques could de-escalate situations without resorting to killing, could protect innocents without becoming an aggressor, could survive encounters with superior opponents long enough for reinforcements to arrive or diplomatic solutions to emerge. Dralig's instruction in Soresu emphasized these practical considerations alongside the form's technical aspects. He taught young Jedi that perfect defense was its own form of strength, that patience could triumph where aggression might fail, that surviving a battle was often more important than winning it decisively. These lessons extended beyond the practice floor. Jedi who internalized Soresu's philosophy carried it into diplomatic missions, into negotiations with hostile parties, into situations where emotional control and defensive patience determined outcomes as much as any lightsaber technique ever could. The Temple Guard, those anonymous sentinels who protected the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, were trained extensively in Soresu for obvious reasons. Their role was inherently defensive, protecting sacred spaces, maintaining security, responding to threats without escalating into unnecessary violence. The Temple Guard's distinctive double-bladed lightsabers, similar to Darth Xana's weapon of choice, paired perfectly with Soresu's defensive philosophy. The extended reach and coverage provided by the double blade amplified Form 3's already formidable defensive capabilities, allowing individual guards to hold critical choke points against multiple opponents if necessary. Dralig developed specialized variations of Soresu specifically for the Temple Guard, techniques optimized for their unique operational environment and equipment. These weren't published in the general curriculum or taught to regular Jedi, representing specialized knowledge passed down through the Guard's internal training. The existence of these variations demonstrated Soresu's adaptability, its capacity to be modified for specific tactical situations without losing the core principles that made it effective. A Temple Guard, using these specialized techniques, could hold a corridor against a dozen attackers, their double blades spinning in defensive patterns that seemed to create an impenetrable wall of plasma. When Order 66 struck and Darth Vader led the 501st Legion's assault on the Jedi Temple, Sin Dralig made his final stand, embodying the principles he had taught for decades. He confronted Vader alongside Padawans Wee Malro and Bane, knowing full well that survival was unlikely, but that resistance was necessary. The security recordings of this confrontation, later discovered by Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda, showed Dralig fighting with all the skill and technique of the finest swordsman in the Order, facing impossible odds with dignity and courage. The battle demonstrated both Soresu's capabilities and its limitations. Dralig's defense was formidable enough that even Vader, empowered by the dark side and consumed by rage, couldn't simply overwhelm him immediately. The Battlemaster's blade moved with precision. His positioning was impeccable, his technique flawless. For precious minutes, he held back the tide, buying time for other Jedi to escape, protecting his students even as the situation grew increasingly desperate. But Vader's power, amplified by his complete surrender to the dark side and his rage at the Jedi Order, he blamed for his mother's death and Padme's perceived betrayal, eventually proved too much even for perfect technique. Dralig's death marked more than just the fall of a skilled warrior. It symbolized the end of an era of systematic Jedi combat training, the breaking of a chain of instruction that had passed from master to student for thousands of years. The knowledge he carried, the refinements and insights he had developed over his long career as battlemaster, died with him in that corridor. Yet his legacy persisted in the techniques of those he had trained, in the recordings preserved in the Great Holocron, in the muscle memory of surviving Jedi who carried his lessons into exile, and eventually into the foundation of Luke Skywalker's New Jedi Order. The applications of Soresu in actual combat situations reveal the full scope of its capabilities and limitations. Understanding these requires examining specific battles where the form proved decisive, where its principles determined outcomes, where its strengths and weaknesses became apparent through practical application under the most extreme conditions. General Grievous represented a unique challenge, perfectly designed to test Soresu's capabilities. The cyborg general wielded 4 lightsabers simultaneously, attacking with mechanical precision and inhuman speed that no organic opponent could match through sheer biology. His training under Count Dooku had given him sophisticated technique to complement his physical advantages, making him one of the most dangerous lightsaber combatants in the galaxy, despite lacking any force sensitivity. Against most Jedi, Grievous's advantages proved overwhelming. He had killed numerous Jedi throughout the Clone Wars, his collection of lightsaber trophies testifying to his deadly effectiveness. Yet when Obi-Wan Kenobi confronted Grievous on Utapau, the general found himself unable to penetrate a defense that seemed impossibly perfect. Kenobi's Soresu had evolved to a level where the number of blades attacking him became almost irrelevant. His single lightsaber created a defensive sphere so complete, moving with such precision and efficiency, that Grievous's four-armed assault found no openings. The battle showcased one of Soresu's most important principles, that perfect defense wasn't about matching your opponent's offensive output, but about covering the necessary space with maximum efficiency. As Grievous ramped up his attack's intensity, driven by frustration at his inability to break through Kenobi's guard, the general made progressively larger mistakes. His form, normally precise, began to deteriorate under the psychological pressure of facing an apparently impenetrable defense. Kenobi remained calm and patient, his technique unwavering, waiting for the moment when aggression would create exploitable weakness. When that moment came, Kenobi struck with characteristic economy, clipping off 2 of Grievous's mechanical hands and dramatically reducing the threat before eventually finishing the confrontation. The duel revealed something crucial about Soresu that less experienced practitioners often missed. The form's defensive nature was psychological warfare as much as physical technique. An opponent facing a perfect Soresu defense experienced mounting frustration, building doubts, growing desperation. These emotions interfered with technique, created impatience, generated the kinds of mistakes that perfect defense was designed to exploit. Grievous, despite his mechanical nature and lack of force connection, still experienced this psychological degradation, proving that Soresu's principles applied universally against any opponent. The Battle of Mustafar between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker stands as perhaps the most dramatic demonstration of Soresu's principles applied at the highest level, against the deadliest possible opposition. This wasn't just a physical confrontation, but a clash of philosophies, patience versus passion, defense versus aggression, wisdom versus power, light versus darkness. Everything that made Soresu effective found its ultimate expression in this duel, and everything that could challenge the form pushed Kenobi to his absolute limits. Anakin, newly transformed into Darth Vader and empowered by his complete surrender to the dark side, attacked with overwhelming fury. His Form V, Gem So, was already one of the most powerful offensive styles. Enhanced by dark side rage and augmented by force power that had always been extraordinary, his assault would have destroyed lesser opponents within seconds. Each strike carried enough force to shatter bones if it connected, came with speed that blurred vision, flowed with a kind of aggressive momentum that forms like Soresu were supposedly vulnerable against. Yet Kenobi's defense held. for an extended duel across the hellish landscape of Mustafar, through chambers filled with lava, across thin walkways over molten flows, through collapsing structures and deteriorating terrain, Kenobi's Soresu technique never broke. His blade intercepted every strike. His movements remained economical even under extreme pressure. His positioning constantly adjusted to maintain optimal defensive angles. The physical exertion was tremendous. Defending against such powerful attacks, even when using efficient technique, still required sustained effort. But Soresu's energy efficiency meant Kenobi wasn't exhausting himself at nearly the rate Vader's aggressive style demanded. More impressively, Kenobi managed the psychological warfare aspects of the confrontation while maintaining perfect technique. This wasn't a faceless opponent, but his former Padawan, someone he had trained, someone he loved as a brother. The emotional weight of the situation would have disrupted most fighters' concentration completely, but Soresu's emphasis on calm, centered awareness meant that Kenobi could acknowledge these emotions without letting them compromise his defense. He fought with a heavy heart but clear mind, the discipline of decades of practice, allowing separation between feeling and action. Kenobi also demonstrated advanced tactical applications of Soresu principles beyond pure defensive technique. He maneuvered the battle strategically, using the environment to create advantages that pure technique couldn't provide. He led Vader onto progressively more dangerous terrain, where the younger warrior's aggressive style became liability rather than asset. Narrow platforms over lava limited the full expression of Gemso's powerful strikes. Unstable footing required constant attention that divided focus from pure offense. Each environmental factor accumulated to neutralize some portion of Vader's advantages. The final moment of the duel, when Kenobi claimed the high ground and Vader attempted his doomed leap, crystallized everything Soresu represented. Kenobi didn't defeat Vader through superior offense or overwhelming power. He defeated him through patience, through careful positioning, through forcing his opponent into a situation where aggression became self-destructive. Vader's leap represented pure aggressive confidence, the dark side conviction that power could overcome any obstacle. Kenobi's response was pure Soresu, a single precisely timed strike that exploited the opening Vader's arrogance created. It was defense transformed into offense at the exact moment when defense had created the opportunity for decisive action. The aftermath proved another Soresu principle, that true victory sometimes looks different from what aggression-focused philosophies imagine. Kenobi had won the physical confrontation, but gained no satisfaction from it. Vader survived, horribly maimed, to become the Emperor's enforcer. The battle had been necessary, but brought no joy, proved no superiority, satisfied no desire for dominance. It was simply what had to be done, executed with the skill and discipline that Formed Third demanded, leaving Kenobi to carry the emotional weight of having struck down someone he had loved. Beyond these famous duels, Soresu proved its worth in countless smaller engagements throughout galactic history. Every battlefield where Jedi faced overwhelming blaster fire, every situation where survival mattered more than decisive victory, every confrontation where a Jedi needed to protect others rather than simply defeat enemies. These scenarios showcased why Soresu remained essential to Jedi training, despite criticisms of its passive nature. During the Clone Wars, Jedi generals leading clone troopers into battle relied heavily on Soresu principles, even if it wasn't their primary form. The ability to deflect massed blaster fire wasn't just about personal survival. It was about maintaining the offensive capabilities of friendly forces. A Jedi general who could step into heavy fire, their blade a blur of defensive motion, created openings for their troops to advance, provided covering fire through deflection, became a mobile shield that allowed tactical maneuvers otherwise impossible. This application of Soresu principles transformed individual defensive technique into force-multiplying tactical asset. The form's limitations were real and significant, despite its many strengths. Against opponents who could maintain aggressive but controlled offense indefinitely, who didn't tire or make mistakes born of frustration, Soresu struggled to create the openings necessary for victory. This was partly why Kenobi faced such difficulty against Dooku initially. The Count's Makashi was so refined, so efficient, that he could maintain offensive pressure without the energy-wasting mistakes that Soresu relied on exploiting. Only when Kenobi's own mastery reached the level where he could hold perfect defense for as long as Dooku could maintain perfect offense did their duels become more balanced. The form also required exceptional mental discipline that not every Jedi could maintain under combat stress. The calm, patient awareness that made Soresu effective wasn't simply a matter of technique. It required emotional control, trust in the Force, willingness to let battles unfold rather than forcing outcomes. Young or impulsive Jedi often struggle with these requirements, their natural human desire for action and resolution conflicting with Soresu's passive philosophy. This was why many Jedi studied Form 3 but never truly mastered it, unable or unwilling to embrace the mindset necessary for perfection in its application. Time-sensitive situations where delay meant catastrophe also challenged Soresu's utility. When innocent lives hung in the balance and every second mattered, the form's patient approach to creating openings could result in mission failure, even if the Jedi survived personally. This tactical limitation meant that Soresu masters needed to pair the form with other capabilities, force powers for mobility or environmental manipulation, alternative forms for situations requiring more aggressive action, tactical awareness to recognize when defensive patience served objectives and when it didn't. Despite these limitations, Form 3's influence on Jedi philosophy extended far beyond lightsaber combat. The principles embodied in Soresu, patience, efficiency, non-aggression, emotional control, trust in the Force, resonated throughout Jedi training in all its aspects. Masters teaching meditation referenced Soresu's moving meditation as a model for maintaining awareness while in deep communion with the Force. Diplomatic instructors used Soresu's patient approach to conflict as a metaphor for negotiation strategies. Even Force theory instructors noted how the form's emphasis on sensing and responding mirrored broader principles about a Jedi's relationship with the living Force. This philosophical influence meant that Soresu persisted even after the fall of the Jedi Order. Luke Skywalker, rebuilding Jedi training from fragments and holocrons, found Soresu's principles preserved in recordings and teachings that survived the Purge. His own combat style, while incorporating elements from multiple forms, showed clear influence from Form 3 in his defensive approach and patient technique. The new Jedi Order he founded included Soresu instruction as fundamental training, recognizing that the form's emphasis on defense and survival remained as relevant in the new era as it had been in the old. The form's legacy also lived on in unexpected places. Military strategists studying Jedi combat techniques noted how Soresu principles could apply to broader tactical situations. The idea of defensive positions designed not to defeat opponents outright, but to make assault so costly that attackers eventually withdrew or made fatal mistakes. This was Soresu philosophy applied to strategic scale. Defensive fortifications that channeled attackers into kill zones. Attrition strategies that wore down enemy forces while preserving friendly strength. Tactical retreats that forced pursuing enemies to overextend. All of these bore resemblance to Form 3 principles, even when divorced from individual lightsaber combat. Force-sensitive individuals who never joined the Jedi Order, who learned lightsaber techniques from fragments of teaching or holocrons salvaged from ruins, often gravitated toward Soresu when they discovered its principles. The form's relative accessibility compared to styles requiring years of dedicated instruction or exceptional physical attributes meant that self-taught Force users could achieve basic competency without formal training. This wasn't true mastery, but it was enough to survive encounters with Imperial Inquisitors or other threats, enough to protect communities or fulfill individual missions. Even among those who never held a lightsaber, Soresu's philosophy found expression in martial arts and combat, training throughout the galaxy. The principles of defensive efficiency, patient waiting for opponents' mistakes, using minimal force to achieve maximum effect, these concepts appeared in fighting styles from hundreds of worlds, often independently discovered but strikingly similar in application. Some martial artists and soldiers who studied these techniques later encountered descriptions of Soresu and recognized the parallels immediately, understanding that Form 3 represented a highly refined version of principles that emerged naturally from thoughtful consideration of combat dynamics. The enduring appeal of Soresu across different contexts and cultures speaks to something fundamental about its philosophy. At its core, Form 3 recognizes a truth that aggressive, domination-focused approaches often miss. That sometimes the greatest strength lies in not acting. That patience can achieve what force cannot. That survival itself represents victory when the alternative is destruction. This wisdom transcends lightsaber combat, applying to conflicts of all kinds across all scales. In our modern understanding of Star Wars history, Form 3 stands as proof that power takes many forms. Darth Vader's overwhelming might, Yoda's profound force connection, Palpatine's manipulative genius. These are obvious expressions of power that shaped galactic history dramatically. But Obi-Wan Kenobi's perfect defense, Tin Dralig's disciplined instruction, Luminara Unduli's unwavering composure, these too were forms of power, subtler perhaps, but no less significant in their impact. They represented the power to endure, to protect, to maintain principles in the face of opposition, to demonstrate that strength, without aggression, remains strength. The battles Soresu masters fought weren't always won in conventional senses. Tin Dralig died in the temple he defended. Luminara Unduli was captured and executed. Depa Billaba sacrificed herself for her Padawan's escape. Yet their defeats were also victories in ways that pure power-focused philosophies struggle to recognize. They proved that some things matter more than personal survival, that perfect technique can hold back darkness even if only temporarily, that the example set by disciplined resistance inspires others long after the individual has fallen. For those seeking to understand lightsaber combat in its fullest expression, Form 3 offers lessons that extend far beyond the technical. Yes, the defensive techniques are sophisticated and effective. Yes, the strategic applications are sound and battle-tested. But more importantly, Soresu teaches that how we face challenges matters as much as whether we overcome them. That patience is strength, not weakness. That defense of others and principles justifies risks that self-preservation alone might not. That sometimes the greatest victory is creating space for something better to emerge, even if we don't live to see it. As you drift toward sleep, consider the masters of Form 3 who have passed into history. Imagine their blades moving through defensive patterns, never yielding, never breaking, perfect in their discipline and technique. Picture Obi-Wan Kenobi standing calm against the storm, Darth Zana weaving defense and sorcery into seamless art, Luminara Unduli defending with serene confidence, Tin Dralig teaching generations the meaning of true mastery. Their stories remind us that the galaxy's fate has always depended not just on those who strike with power, but on those who defend with wisdom. Form 3. Soresu, the way of the Mynock, the resilience form, the ultimate expression of defensive philosophy in lightsaber combat. It emerged from necessity, evolved through centuries of refinement, proved itself in the most desperate battles galactic history recorded. It represents the understanding that true strength sometimes means enduring what cannot be overcome immediately, that patience creates opportunities aggression misses, that the defensive blade protecting others embodies Jedi ideals as completely as any technique ever could. If you found this exploration of Form 3 valuable, consider supporting this channel by hitting that like button and subscribing for more deep dives into Star Wars lore. Share your thoughts on Soresu in the comments. Who's your favorite practitioner of the form? What battles best exemplify its principles? What other aspects of lightsaber combat would you like us to explore? Your engagement helps ensure we can continue bringing you the comprehensive, detailed explorations of the galaxy, far, far away, that you've come to expect. The way of the Minok endures, its lessons preserved in holocrons and teachings, in the muscle memory of those few who achieved true mastery, in the philosophical legacy that transcends any single form or technique. As long as there are those who choose defense over aggression, patience over fury, wisdom over power, the spirit of Form 30 persists. May you find in its principles inspiration for your own challenges, whatever form they might take, wherever you might face them. May you too discover that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in the power to strike, but in the wisdom to endure.